operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look back at the Gators' 24-13 win over UCF this past Saturday in the Swamp. Before we begin, go ahead, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and comment what your favorite takeaway from the game was, whether it was, I love the way the offense moved the ball in the first half, or heck, if it's, man, we shouldn't be taking our foot off the gas in the second half. Whatever your big takeaway is, I know I said favorite, but if you have a big takeaway that maybe isn't positive, throw that down below as well. Let's get some discussion going. With that said, everyone, thank you for joining in. Saturday, definitely a fun night in the Swamp. More fun than I thought it would be, just because it was never really close once Florida got the 2-score lead. Doesn't mean it couldn't have gotten close had one or two things changed, but the fact was it didn't get close, and that made it a lot better. As even before the season, even before the Miami blowout loss, before the Texas A&M blowout loss, there was a lot of nerves around this matchup for a lot of Gator Nation. So getting the win 24-13, a big deal at home. And after this, it's only going to get tougher. I do think that the UCF team that we saw on Saturday might end up not being a 500 or better team, which is weird since UCF has been pretty good for, close to a decade, 15 years now. When you look back, I mean, they're going, I think it was 2012, 2014. They're going to New Year's Six Bowls. And then, of course, we talk about 2017, 2018, lots of good teams there. Obviously not the best team in 2015, but that said, generally a program that has done well. And I say that only because right now UCF, like Florida, sits at 3-2, and like Florida, has the hardest part of its schedule coming up. I think they face almost the entire top of the Big 12 as it stands now, with the exception of Kansas State. And one of the teams that may not be above them, they face this Saturday in Cincinnati, whose losses are to the top of the Big 12, Texas Tech, and the team that's two losses were to Texas Tech and 5-0 Pitt. Sorry, I'm blanking a little bit, got a little bit of Hurricane Milton on the mind. Please stay safe, by the way, as we do have that coming through Tampa, across the Central Florida area where I am, and then out the other side, the timing of which keeps shifting a little bit later and later, so we'll see how that ends up. But let's go ahead, before we begin, give our friends, and you know who they are, Alvarez Lawn Company, a shout out. Alvarez Lawn Company, if you're in the Central Florida area, and of course, talking about Hurricane Milton coming through, they may be able to help you a little bit on the backside if, unfortunately, you do have some issues. But Alvarez Lawn Company, they can do any landscaping or yard work needs that you have that I'm aware of. But anyways, give them a call or text. They'll give you a free quote at 407-490-2617. You can also shoot them an email at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Once again, if you're in the Central Florida area, give my friends Alvarez Lawn Company a call or text for a free quote on their services at 407-490-2617. Also email them at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. So anyways, let's talk about it. Florida's offense against the UCF defense. What I said was basically it begins and ends with us taking advantage of a bad passing defense. And Florida threw 27 passes on the night. Of those 27 passes, 23 were completions. only put up 229 yards through the air, but of course that was enough to get the job done. I did not like that we did not score in the second half. I don't like shutting it down early, and just some examples of that. Of course, if we watched the game that was late on Saturday night, the Miami Cal game, that's why you don't shut down. Other teams can come back. Personally, I was in Miami in 2003 when we blew a big lead, choke at Doak. And as we're in the stadium and a lot of Gator fans had left, I think there was 6:55 left or it was 5:56, something like that. I turned to my brother. I say, I don't know why a lot of fans have left. UCF has the ball, and we were down by about this much with less time in 2015 against Tennessee. All it takes is one big broken play, and all of a sudden it is more of a game. Luckily, that did not happen. However, that's why you do need to keep your foot on the gas. A, you keep that time of possession, you run down that clock and make the chances of that comeback even slimmer. And B, there's not an opportunity for just some weird thing to happen, some weird fumble, and now someone else has a chance to win. Just keep moving forward. But I don't want to harp on that. That's definitely a takeaway to have, and definitely something that needs to happen. This is not the first time we've seen this Gator team try and just sit on a lead rather than extend it. But fortunately, it did not bite us this time. But in the game of college football, you never know when it may bite you. But going back to that passing offense, Graham Mertz, 1923, 179 yards, 1 touchdown. DJ Lagway only throwing 4 passes, completed all 4 for 50 yards, average of 12.5 yards per attempt, also yards per completion. That tends to happen when you have 100% completion percentage. But anyways, definitely a good deal for sure. I was surprised, though, we didn't see more throwing out DJ Lagway, especially when his second drive ended up being in a 2-minute situation. And that was, again, talking about things that are unfortunate. You get the ball with less than 2 minutes, so you should be able to show off your arm. That's the time you should be throwing. But we called a lot of runs. Granted, one run broke it for over 30 yards. I believe it was Jacoby Jackson. Montrell Johnson for 34 yards. My bad. I guess I was thinking 34 yards and thinking number 24. But anyways, runs 34 yards, and then they call a quarterback draw, which I don't think made too much sense. And unfortunately, that does, when you're trying to play 2-minute offense without timeouts, that does not help at all. So I'm not sure what we were trying to do there, running the clock, especially with a guy like DJ Lagway, who opens up a lot more of the field. Not saying you have to go deep, but because they have to respect that the underneath game does open up more, helps you move the ball down the field. And with that said, another thing that I talked about in the pregame was talking about how well our offense, or how well their run defense was, and how it was 11th in the nation. I was kind of concerned about how that may or may not look. Of course, acknowledged some of the teams they faced, not great quality, and so that helps out. Also talked about how if you're able to, the other teams are able to pass so good, such as their 106th ranked passing offense passing defense going to the game, why would you run the ball quite a bit? Plus other teams getting down to UCF, like New Hampshire, getting down, you're going to throw the ball more or whatnot. And with that said, 130 yards on the ground is 50 yards higher than what they were averaging. So you definitely had a good day there as far as running. Montrell Johnson, 5.4 yards per carry. We've talked about before, though, Montrell Johnson, he'll break one every now and again, but we need to get more consistent on the other carries as well. We talked about this in Miami. We've talked about this in the past, such as LSU 2022. You take away that 34 yard run, and he's averaging just over 2 yards per carry for the other 9 carries. Now, some of that may be him, but some of that is definitely the play calling and predictability that we continue to see, as we saw with some third downs. Granted, we did convert. Our third down conversions were a lot better than they have been. For example, in this game, we were 6 of 13. I believe it was Miami. We're like 1 for 9. So I will take 6 of 13 as a step up. Granted, UCF's defense is not Miami's defense. And some of those times I do believe we're shooting ourselves in the foot with calling things like screen passes. And there are times we called screens this game, and the guy, and I think Montreal Johnson on one of his catches, caught the pass, made a guy miss, and goes for 8-9 yards. And I was joking with my brother who was with me. I go, we're having a conversation. Is it really is it a great play call if a guy misses a tackle and that's how you're able to gain yards? And generally my thoughts on something like that is, no, it's not a great play call, but something just worked out. It's like if you run your guy into an 8-man box, is that necessarily a smart thing to do if you're running, 5 O linemen on 8 men, but somehow 2 guys miss a tackle and it goes? Well, no, it's a great player made a play, but it didn't make the play smart. And that's how I feel about some of these calls where you're running short of the sticks on third down, or you're running screen passes on third down, which we tend to do both those things quite a bit. And it's funny, I do think it was Allie Peak Wilbur who texted about Gator great Eric Wilbur, her husband, saying on one of the third downs where we threw short of the sticks, that shouldn't even be an option. You shouldn't go short of the sticks on third down. And of course, I had some fun with that because that tends to be one of our tendencies. But with that said, I can't really knock at least his first half performance. I mean, Jacoby Jackson, I talked about him. Thought he had that 34-yard run, but number 24 did not. However, he did have a 19-yard run, 3 carries, 25 yards. Of course, we take away the long run. He's averaging 3 yards per carry. And that's about where I think could happen against the nation's, prior to this game, 11th ranked run defense. But hey, again, with that 11th ranked run defense, we still put up 130 yards. We found a way to break a 19-yard run, a 34-yard run. And that's really what we needed to get the ball moving, get these points, and then taking just enough advantage of the pass defense. DJ Lagway, of course, probably, in my opinion, the play of the game when he came in, hitting DK down to the 1 on that 37-yard rope of a throw. I mean, what a great throw. What a catch by DK. Unfortunately, it didn't end up in the end zone, but good throw, good catch. The line overall doing a great job with UCF, which is what we need to see. And in my intro, I was talking about UCF, and this is what we're going to focus some of the talk of the offense and the defense through. And this is why I brought it up in the intro, is UCF possibly ending up with a losing record. We need to keep it in focus of, until we see what this UCF team is. Even right now, there's some questions about who UCF is after being blown out by Colorado, after losing at Florida. Of course, if you watch the opposing sidelines, which for those of you that don't, it's our YouTube exclusive little episodes where we talk to podcaster for other schools that we play. Last week, talked to Knight Bingle from the Knighted Ones, and he was even, kind of nervous about this game and how UCF fans weren't confident after that Colorado loss. I'm sure after this performance, even less confident. I've already pre-recorded due to the storms. I've already pre-recorded the opposing sideline that will be released this week for the Tennessee game. Got to speak with Michael from Vol Fanatic Show. So definitely check that out when it releases tomorrow, as as this is released. So we generally have had a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday release schedule. And on Wednesday on YouTube, it's the opposing sideline. But anyways, I bring that up because Roger was talking about just some of the questions around this UCF team. And then this UCF team ends up being, 5-7 or 3-9 if they don't win another game. I think they might, but they've got, again, we talked about how tough of a road they have comparatively in the Big 12. You've got to weigh that for how big of a win. It's definitely a big win as far as you beat an in-state team that you had questions against, but I see a lot of people making the talk of like, we just went and beat a middle of the pack SEC team or higher, like a Kentucky or a Tennessee or something. And I'm like, I don't know if they're at that level this year. There are years that UCF has been great. I don't think that's this year. I don't know if this right now, Billy Napier, if we don't count anyone from this year, although I think within a game or two, we're going to see A&M and Miami secure a winning record, get that 7th win for the season. But if they, not counting them going to the season, we're 3-12 against teams with winning records. I'm not sure if UCF qualifies to be counted as 4 right now. Of course, if we count the other 2 teams I mentioned, Miami and A&M under Billy Napier, we would be, even counting UCF, we'd be 4-14, and that's not where we want to be. But before we start making this game into a bigger win than it needs to be, that's what we need to keep focus on. That said, still good things from this offense. Still a lot of things you want to see, including how that line played against what was going to be a pretty decent defensive line, and also running for 130 yards against a team that was only allowing 80. That's still good regardless of how UCF ends up for the season. And then one thing I also, I guess that's a defensive thing, which we'll talk about. In fact, sounds like a good time for us to switch over to defense. But before we do, I want to give a shout out to my friends at Gator Chatter. Playing in the Survivor League and doing the pick'em. I actually somehow topped the pick'em for the week, tied for first for the crazy week that was college football. And of course, Survivor hanging on with my 2 strikes. I believe Cincinnati actually was one of those strikes when I picked them for one of those losses that they had by like 1 point to Texas Tech, I believe. But either way, lots of great talk about Gator football and other sports, whether it's talking about what do we believe about Billy Napier, talking about the UCF game, or even looking ahead to Tennessee game and some of the hijinks that go along with that. Do check out my friends at GatorChatter.com. And remember, GatorChatter.com is your Florida Gator sports bar. All right, so let's talk about the Florida defense against the UCF offense. This is something that I think if we went to the game, many of us would have questions on. Many of us were potentially worried, can we stop this defense or stop this offense with this Florida defense? And I'll admit I was kind of nervous about that. And the defense answered that question in the affirmative. Yes, we can stop this offense. The number 2 rushing offense in the nation, averaging 326 yards per game going into the season. Well, or going into the game against the Gators, rushed for only 108 yards. KJ Jefferson, and this is what I was going to get at earlier. KJ Jefferson ran for, and of course this includes sacks, negative 18 yards. Florida getting 5 sacks, hadn't gotten many sacks on the year. And here we go. George Gums Jr. leading the way with 1.5 sacks. Grace, Pup Howard getting a sack, and then some half sacks for guys like Justice Boone and Tyreek Sapp and others. LJ McCray as well. And Florida for not getting much pass rush, not getting much sacks. Definitely, the 5 sacks, especially when UCF's trying to come back, is big. And what we want to see against what we could label an inferior opponent of UCF, even though they just moved up to the Big 12, does not quite have the talent on the roster that Florida has. I think they're in the 30s in talent composite. Of course, Florida's in the top 15. And one thing I want to say as well is we're worried that UCF would come in, potentially have pace. Of course, Knight Bingle was talking about we don't do as much up tempo, although we can this season. And I've seen people talking about, oh yeah, we stopped UCF's up tempo. I did the math on that, and I'll bring up my chart. So I've got a nice, lovely chart right here for those watching on YouTube, where I actually, when I rewatched the game, I marked how much time was left on the clock when the ball was snapped. And this, of course, includes things like after stoppages. So you got extra time. That doesn't talk about the play clock being down, and after quarter changes, where I know at least once I had to put a 40 because the TV clock never started. So sometimes you had higher snaps, higher time left on the clock. And even then, with those higher things, with that 40, which should have been lower probably, with all of that, they still were snapping with around 13, 14, 15 seconds. And usually if you're talking about teams running tempo, teams running, upbeat, you're talking about they usually snap with 25, 20 seconds left. So UCF was not moving as fast as the up-tempo teams we've seen from the past. I will say that UCF first drive, I'll just read out the times left. First play, which they got a big play, 11 seconds, then 30, then 21. They slowed it down a little bit with 12, 14, then 18. Then they had, 2 good plays to get them in the red zone where they're in first and goal, I believe. 26, 25 left on that clock again, running really fast. And then next 3 plays end up having to kick a field goal. Let me tell you how long they waited. 11 seconds left on the play clock, 12 seconds left on the play clock, 9 seconds left on the play clock. So they slowed down in the red zone there. And because of that, our defense was able to come make a stop, which is good. We definitely want our defense making those stops, but I just can't say, hey, we showed we could handle, the hurry up when we don't really see the up tempo hurry up too much. And their second field goal drive, same thing. They get down there and then the numbers slow to 7-5 delay of game and then 14 seconds. And that's 14 seconds, of course, coming out of the penalty all the time with delay of game to get the call in, all that stuff. So I bring that up again for the up tempo, as some questions weren't answered about the tempo, but some questions were like, can we get them to go to the pass? Are we worried about them being the number 2 rushing team in the nation? Well, 108 yards. That's phenomenal. RJ Harvey, their top running back, did have 16 carries, 75 yards, average of 4.7 yards per carry. But when you're up by 21 points, RJ Harvey becomes a little bit less of a factor because sure, they can take 7 minutes to score after the half. Let me go and pull up exactly how long that drive was after the half. So, actually, yeah. So after that, UCF 14 plays, 56 yards, 8.5 minutes. Yeah, that's you can waste that time, but you're not going to come from behind taking 8.5 minutes of a drive on a drive. What they do? Think they were us against Utah last year or something? But anyways, sorry, had to throw out that example. But anyways, that's why you see the run game start to not be a thing, and then I said I thought if we could force UCF to pass, it's going to be good for the Gators. And of course it was. Let me get ahead back to the KJ Jefferson stat line. I love this thing. 12 passes or 12 completions on 22 passes. So just over 50% completion percentage, 165 yards. That's 7.5 yards per attempt, which is actually only a few 0.3 lower than Graham Mertz, but 0 TDs, 1 interception, and what a big interception that was. And then, of course, QBR, which is what ESPN, it's a metric they use, takes into account the running and throwing threat of a quarterback. And I do have to say the 16.8 QBR for KJ Jefferson was some really great work by the Florida Gators D. Jason Marshall, another good night. At least one ball batted down. Had himself half a tackle for loss. I mean, showed up again well. Jordan Castell, 6 tackles on the night for solo. Got to give him a little bit of shout out, as I gave some others as well. Jack Pyburn playing more. Of course, he had big words coming into the day, and of course saw the talk and had a comment later about the talk is cheap. And you know, he came in and backed it up, at least against the Knights, and you got to give him credit for that. Anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while knows that I am a pretty big fan of Jack Pyburn. So good to see him come in and do really well. Hopefully that continues as we continue to as we move forward in the season to Tennessee. And of course, we're going to have to talk about that a little bit more in the preview. But with that said, great defensive effort on the night by the Gators against the Knights, and the end of the game, just a lot of good feelings, as there should be. Doesn't mean there's not things to fix. Doesn't mean you can't make observations about you need to continue pushing the ball forward, or, hey, UCF might not be a winning team, so let's not overrate this win. But you can have those honest conversations while also being really happy about this win. Definitely beats the alternative, but now it's time to focus on the heaviest part of our schedule, Tennessee and Kentucky before that bye. And then, of course, here comes Georgia, Texas, back-to-back weeks before returning home for back-to-back weeks against LSU and Ole Miss, and finishing up at Doak Campbell Stadium against the Florida State Seminoles. So, again, great win, 24-13 over UCF. If you have not yet, do like the video and comment what your favorite takeaway that you personally have from this UCF game. With that said, everybody, thank you all for listening. And as always, go Gators.